Welcome back to a special spooky Halloween edition of the SEO Weekly, where queries are weird, advice is controversial, especially in this episode, and everything depends. Stick around for some of the horror stories of Google Ads. We'll talk about WTF is SEO newsletter, and a really cool tool that came across my radar. Don't go chasing waterfalls, Tim. Okay, and if you stick around to the end, I will tell you what the heck this Halloween SEO themed costume is supposed to be. So let's dive in. Okay, this week, the search team at Google released more data to the API. In fact, this Search Analytics API, which already provides data about search performance, is now being updated to include Discover and Google News data. In addition, regex support has also been added to the query and page dimensions. I know Lily Ray of AMP Digital is already diving into this. The potential of looking into this Discover data is really valuable for SEOs because Discover results are typically pretty unpredictable. They can fluctuate dramatically. So if you want to try and look at this at scale, it's been historically difficult to look at just in Google Search Console. The API data should allow you to, make some deeper dives, surface some more interesting insights. Very cool. I don't know if you've heard, but the AG of Texas in the US is, along representing 16 other states, suing Google for some advertising malpractice of the marketplace. Now, Jason Kint did a 40-tweet deep dive this week. Some more documents, internal documents, were unredacted, so we got more information as to what was actually happening from some of internal Google documents. It looks like a big storm of poo-poo is happening. It really is literally a horror story. The biggest part of this that seems to come out that touches on SEO is related to AMP. For those who don't know, AMP is a technology that allows you to speed up your web pages, stripping it down of a whole lot of other sort of images and JavaScript and whatnot to give like a simple version of a web page. Google has been pushing this for a long time. Basically, advertisers are trying to get around this with header bidding. It's a little complicated, but in essence, what happened was Google throttled the speed of non-AMP pages. So basically, if you were doing a non-AMP page, your page might have been slower, which would have influenced whether people, were doing this header bidding strategy. It ultimately makes Google look really bad in how they were manipulating the marketplace and manipulating the speed of non-AMP web pages that would impact ultimately your ranking, your search results, your traffic, the user experience. Google potentially looks really bad on this. Actually, the VP of Content, Henry Powderly, for Third Door Media, wrote on Search Engine Land a searing indictment. Rand Fishkin also gave his two thoughts of that this is, manipulative and problematic. And so it became a really big issue in the SEO community. Now, Jono Alderson actually said, so much of the anti-AMP noise is nonsense and hyperbole and a whole parade of straw men. I wish folks would do their research before wielding pitchforks. There's definitely some very bad stuff surfacing in the unredacted complaint stocks, but AMP isn't one of them. So much hot air, which got a lot of the SEO community responding to that. Back and forth, both sides had strong opinions about how we should approach AMP, knowing that the technology is sound. The fact that Google was using it to manipulate the ads marketplace is problematic. In fact, Barry Adams responded, "Weird take. Shouldn't the goal be to make the whole web better, not to embrace one proprietary tech that gets an unfair advantage, a tech that additionally has proven to lead to an unhealthier commercial ecosystem for publishers, i.e. lower monetization?" He says, "I understand where you're coming from. AMP isn't penalized, so you should use it, but that's a warped perspective. It basically says you should adopt what Google forces you into, or else it's coercion, not merit." They continue to go back and forth. Basically, they're talking about this idea that there's this entanglement between the technology and the ad manipulation where AMP is not at fault, That said, and you should take advantage of any opportunity Google gives you. That said, it is not do no evil, not that Google has that motto anymore, to throttle non-AMP pages for their own financial gain. It really did hurt the publisher industry, as Henry points out. I'd love to hear your take on it. Check out the Twitter thread to see more about what's going on there and see the various opinions. On a less horrible side of Google, but actually more beneficial of doing good in the world and relevant to Halloween, how we're always focused on making sure kids are safe. Well, Google's trying to do their part. They have added the ability for teens and kids, when their images come up in search, to basically have more control over that, to submit that they don't want to be included. This is a really unique step for Google, in my opinion, just because Google's never given that sort of authority or power or control over individuals in the SERP results. So now teens and kids can actually, submit a form and no longer have their images be included. We'll see how this plays out and how effective it is, but Danny Sullivan provided this update this week, and I think that's a really great positive step of how we can protect our kids and teens when it comes to, their presence in Google search results. Going back to somewhat controversial, on Monday, Aleda and Arija Bawali and Eli Schwartz were all diving into the SEO FOMO Twitter Spaces, in which they talk about, weekly topics. And one thing that came up from them was about Core Web Vitals and whether or not people have actually seen, any sort of impact on search results. Is it something that actually makes a difference, or is it really just something that improves the customer experience? Eli asked on Twitter, he said, today in Aleda's SEO FOMO chat, Arija Bawali brought up that she has not seen any impact from Core Web Vitals work. I've always been skeptical that there would ever be measurable impact from work on speed, but now that it's been a few months, can anyone point to impact? And so got a lot of great comments back from that. I would say across the board, people were arguing that Google never said it was really going to be a ranking factor. If anything, it would be minimal. In fact, Glenn Gabe and Lily Ray were on the Marketing O'Clock Marketing Talk show back in September, where they discussed it, and they felt strongly that there were not going to be any impacts. They haven't seen any impact. It's important to do that for the user experience. If it's a faster website that loads quickly without any sort of cumulative layout shift where ads are jumping around, you're going to see a positive revenue impact, but it's not necessarily going to impact ratings. Some of the other comments from that Twitter thread came from, for instance, Mark Preston said, the only impact I have personally seen from the Core Web Vitals update is on one site, it doubled its organic traffic after the update, but actually failed Core Web Vitals in Google Search Console for every page. All the other sites I work on didn't see any noticeable impact. Meanwhile, Christine Schaschinger, I'm sorry if I butchered your name, Christine. Yes, I have a site that improved 20% to 30% depending on the day. That's not as good as when they just used page speed, but since that is all they have worked on for the last year, I can point to that being the likely cause of the improvement. And then Lyndon Nelson Allen gave his 2 cents, which I actually agree with. Lyndon, I'm sorry, I keep mentioning you too much in my SEO Weekly, but you keep putting in great content. So what he said was, Google were quite clear from the start it was not going to be a massive ranking factor initially, and people seem to miss the main benefactor, Google. Faster, lighter pages, quicker render equals faster processing, more crawls equal cheaper cost per URL and more per second, etc. The sad part is it leads to SEOs getting stuff sorted that should have been done by UX design years ago, but unless there's clear motivation, beloved gains, things like load performance are typically ignored. And here's where I agree with Lyndon. I was thinking about this when it came to securing the internet, moving from HTTP to HTTPS. Google basically said it was going to be a major ranking factor, and it was a much easier switch, but then you would see tons of websites, they had a heads up. They moved over to SSLs and making it HTTPS more quickly than you would expect, which ultimately does make the web safer. In that case, it did actually seem to have an impact on rankings. Core Web Vitals, there is an argument of like, how can you isolate that there is a specific impact, which is really hard to do when there were so many other algorithm updates this summer, and it's just hard in general to isolate for specific aspects. That said, this is a sneaky pitch for Rankable Live next week, where I'm having Will Critchlow of Search Pilot, who's going to come on and talk a little bit about A/B testing SEO. Should be fun. I do feel like the Core Web Vitals update is important for user experience, but isn't going to necessarily probably impact your rankings. Last week on Search Engine Land, J.R. Oakes of Locomotive Agency did a really awesome article about how to fix the SEO issues that keep you from achieving your goals. He talked a lot in this deep dive of how they help clients of, basically if you have a holistic approach where everyone's involved in SEO or at least aware of SEO at your company and you're actually investing in SEO, you're gonna see more organic growth gains, which makes a lot of sense. But he broke it down into all of the different factors that you would want to consider for this holistic SEO property. In fact, what he considered was important, which you should think about and read this awesome article by JR, where, for instance, effective SEO requires a holistic approach. Companies need team buy-in and resources to succeed with SEO. SEO teams should focus on clarity of communication and effective prioritization. Prioritization is a really hard thing that comes up all the time because you want to work on SEO specific jobs that are actually going to move the needle. Hard to identify sometimes. Key areas to consider in SEO strategies are links, content, experience, and relevance. He talked about GIGO, which is garbage in, garbage out. That's a very real thing. Taking the time to go slow with accurate XML sitemaps, custom metrics, user feedback mechanisms, etc., can make your life easier and give you data to inform growth. Spend some time watching user sessions. Work hard to ensure your pages solve a problem or provide the right answer. Look at how your page's content aligns with user searches provided by Google, and write to support and build your site's subject matter expertise. Credibility is key. All of the things that JR delineates from this article make sense. They're obvious. They're easier said than done, but he gives you a very great roadmap, a great roadmap for you to work through. Definitely worth reading that article. Chima Mmeje delivered an awesome article on Google searches, less thought of younger brother, sister, Bing. She wrote for SEMrush a guide to Microsoft's Bing search and how to optimize your site for it. Great comprehensive article from Chima. I love her articles. Definitely check that one out if you are paying attention to Bing at all, which you should be. It does provide some traffic. And then Joy Hawkins of Sterling Sky in the world of local SEO trick-or-treaters. I miss local SEO. I did a lot of it with Grade Us and the team and Gather Up when I was doing reputation management. So with local SEO, she wrote an article which was kind of a case study in terms of the leads that Google My Business provides versus organic SERPs. And what she found was that you'd see, 2 to 6 times more leads from Google My Business than organic results, depending on the industry. She found that at least there was a 30% increase in leads for Google My Business from 2018 to 2021, so an increase over time. And what's interesting is Google My Business actually tends to underreport leads compared to using call tracking stats, which makes sense. If someone's calling directly from their phone by pressing on the number, then that would show up in Google My Business. Whereas if they saw the number somewhere on their, like on the desktop and then they put it into their phone, that wouldn't be tracked in Google My Business. So if you're using a call tracking number, you'll have more accurate results there. But it just really highlights when you are doing any sort of SEO work in the local space, it's so important to work on your Google My Business listing, make sure it's fleshed out. That ultimately is going to drive you more leads than just your organic search results. Another shout out to Lydia from her SEO FOMO newsletter. She pointed me in the direction. I saw this. Her highlight from last weekend was WTF is SEO, which is an awesome newsletter from Jessie, Willms, and Shelby Blackley. Both of these women are in the news industry, and so they wrote this newsletter all about publisher SEO, focusing on things like their most recent newsletter was about content auditing for news publishers, looking through your content, how to improve it from an SEO perspective. I think the news industry has a lot of challenges where they're trying to get into, the news snippet, the top stories, but at the same time, building out evergreen content that will continually rank for, high-level keywords. It's a unique challenge for publishers, and I think their newsletter is awesome and worth checking out. Speaking of which, Lidia Infante did a great roundup of SEO newsletters. They keep popping up all over the place. There are so many good ones out there. She found 26 across SEO and then just general marketing that are worth digging into. Some of my favorites include Nick Leroy's SEO for Lunch, Aleda's SEO FOMO. There are a ton of good ones out there. Definitely check out that article to find one that you like. And then one that was pointed out there that I've seen recently that's awesome is Carolyn Lyden has done one that's a newsletter for Salary Negotiation Pro. And what she's doing is she's sending out emails that kind of give you tips on how to negotiate your salary, which can be really tricky, especially with the gender gap. She kind of provides those insights that you can use to bring to the table, because I think it's very intimidating generally to ask for a raise or negotiate salary when you get a new job. Carolyn has a lot of great thoughts on that. Definitely sign up for her newsletter. Check it out. All of the links to all of this are in the comments. And finally, in terms of tools and features, one that came on my radar that I thought was really cool was Waterfaller by Tim Bednar. Don't go chasing waterfalls. In this case, you should. His tool, which has been around for a year, Cyrus Shepard pointed out back in March of how cool it is to identify and how to fix your core web vitals, specifically how to create a customized playbook to improve page speeds. The cool thing about his tool is you put in the URL and then he can actually provide you with user stories, because it's so technical, that you could send to your dev team on how to fix specific issues. So it's like an actionable roadmap for Core Web Vitals. I think it's a great free tool that's worth using. Check it out, put it to good use. Even if they're not a great ranking factor, improving your Core Web Vitals helps the user experience. Well, that's it. If you didn't get a chance, I had an awesome conversation talking with DC Glenn of Whoomp, There It Is, the song, the 90s hip hop tag team. He was on Rankable Live yesterday. It was a really great conversation. He is very knowledgeable about SEO and crushing it. Who'd have thunk it? We all come to SEO weird ways, but it was awesome. So check out that video, that interview. Next week, like I mentioned, I have Will Critchlow of Search Pilot joining me to talk about A/B testing, SEO edge testing, some of the cool things that him and his company do when it comes to SEO. Really excited for that. As always, thank you for checking out the SEO Weekly. I am Garrett Sussman of iPullrank. If you haven't guessed it, I am a query for fragmented search. That is my costume. We looked up cookies, chocolate chip cookies. We looked up tag team. We looked up football. All different search intents and fragmented search results. That's what I am. That's my mouthful. If you enjoyed this episode or any of my episodes, please subscribe to our channel, get notifications. Please like, subscribe, share all over the place on the Twitters, on the LinkedIns, on the Facebooks, on TikToks. I don't think anyone shared on TikTok yet. What the heck? If you have any thoughts, controversial opinions, or weird queries, please leave them in the comments. We very much appreciate you. I hope you have a fantastic weekend, a happy Halloween. Be safe out there, and we will see you next week.